Started. We're going to do the review for test 3. So the test will comprise about max either 70 multiple choice. Minimum I'll have 60 on there. So you can think of be 20 for autonomic, 20 for special, and 20 for endocrine system. You are going to have one long answer question. Only one is going to be worth 10 points. So nervous system, coming down to the autonomic nervous system. I want you to define it, be able to define it. What are the major differences between somatic and autonomic nervous system? That's where this slide comes in. So make sure you remember autonomic nervous system, part of the nervous system responsible for control of bodily functions, not consciously directed. This is the big one here. These are the major differences, anatomical or phenotypic differences between somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Know this, very important. I will ask you questions about this. Sympathetic, parasympathetic, general definitions. I want you to know that as well. This involves homeostasis. Both of these work in conjunction together. One does not completely cancel the other one out. They work together. It suppresses. It doesn't turn off, it just suppresses it. This one, acetylcholine, make sure you know neurotransmitters associated with each one. What do they do? Acetylcholine, norepinephrine, make sure you know parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. Cholinergic neurons. Two main types of cholinergic neurons. I start going into nicotinic and muscarinic. These are transmitters associated with acetylcholine, ligand gated. Where can I find these? Neuromuscular junction, regular skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac tissue, smooth muscle. I do want you to know a bit about botulism. What does it do? I'll ask you general questions about botulism. I went over it in class what botulism is. Make sure you know what that is. General characteristics of what it does. Norepinephrine. This is when I start going into the major characteristics of each neurotransmitter associated with sympathetic and parasympathetic. Know these. What is acetylcholine? Know everything about acetylcholine that I talked about. Norepinephrine, what does it do? When it hits your bloodstream, norepinephrine, what does it do? I talk about major thing it does, vasoconstriction. Then I go into, right, that is a key feature of epinephrine. It can be a hormone and can also be a neurotransmitter. I won't ask you anything about structure like this. I know I talked about in class that I drop an H, a hydrogen, and that becomes now a hormone. I'm not going to ask you specifics on that. Just know that epinephrine, they can be a hormone, a neurotransmitter, and what does it do? And I talk about this right here. This little slide talks about what it does as a neurotransmitter, general function. What is the difference between a hormone and a neurotransmitter? This slide tells you. Know that. Anaphylactic shock, what is it? I talked about it in class. What is going on? How does epinephrine help? What does it do? Tell me. I talked about anaphylactic shock. In this, what happens? Your capillaries, your immune system detects some type of antigen. Your capillaries start to swell, release, open up. This is where you end up getting heat, redness, swelling, tenderness, and pain. You don't need to know the specific cell names, just know white blood cells. So what is anaphylactic shock? What happens? And how does epinephrine treat it? Right? And I talk about this in this slide. How does it treat it? What does it do? Know this, key anatomical differences between both of these. These slides tell you, right? Differences, key anatomical differences. Parasympathetic, sympathetic. Very important, both of these, right? T1 through L1, this is what I mean, this lists them right here. Cranial nerves associated. They're never going away. I keep repeating it. They are not. What are the cranial nerves associated with each one? These are it right here. The recap, parasympathetic of this. Make sure you know this. Salivation, lacrimation, urination, digestion, defecation, sexual activity, acetylcholine, remember, parasympathetic. Parasympathetic, cranial nerves associated with it. It's a slow system. Then we jump into sympathetic nervous system. This one, again, neurotransmitter associated with it. How does the sympathetic nervous system start? From start to finish. Make sure you let me know, and I talk about it here, right? I go into detail what happens. Do you know what happens, right? Adrenocorticotropic hormone. What is the process of seeing it? Going all the way to your brain, down hypothalamus, down spinal cord. So if we know all the things that happen when my fight or flight kicks in, very important, right? Remember, make sure you know acetylcholine, adrenal medulla is dropped there in that section, not the cortex, adrenal medulla. Norepinephrine, I go into detail what this is. If you need to revisit the lectures that I talked about in Blackboard, and I'll go over more detail, you have it right there. What does it do more? All right, what does it inhibit as well? Okay, hypothalamus oversees the whole autonomic nervous system. Again, autonomic nervous system, big one. What is the difference between autonomic nervous system, somatic nervous system? That first couple of slides, that's there. What is the difference between sympathetic, parasympathetic? How are they similar? How are they different? How do they function? What are the cranial nerves associated with them? Sympathetic, how does that switch go on? Parasympathetic, what does it do? What is it in charge of? Same thing. And that is pretty much autonomic nervous system. So general term, what is it? What are the major functions of the autonomic nervous system? How is it different from the somatic nervous system? The two major branches. Know the cranial nerves associated. No botulism, no anaphylactic shock that I talked about. Acetylcholine, epinephrine. Know how fight or flight is turned on. What does it upregulate? What does this suppress? And cranial nerves associated with that. Let's jump on to special senses. Special senses right here. Major ones. Here for each one, know how we process each one. So for example, vision. From start to finish, how does light come in? If I pick any of these, I'm going to pick one of the 5. You need to tell me. Remember, you're only going to have one. I want you to be as descriptive as possible. I'm going to be very, very careful in what you write. So if we're talking eye, you're going to tell me light comes in. Where does it hit first? You're not going to tell me retina. You're going to tell me first cornea. Then you have the pupil, iris. The lens? Light is also going to hit lens, ciliary body. What do all these function of these do? Then where do I go to? Then now we can hit the retina. What happens in the retina? What are the major cells in your retina? Remember, don't forget this is flipped upside down. So you're going to go tell me everything, every single part, what is the function of these? Finally, until it reaches, right? And I go into detail in the lectures, What are photoreceptors? What do they do? You're going to tell me each part. What are they? Then eventually reach in your visual cortex. It's divided into 5 major sections. So that's what you're going to do for each one, as I went through it in lecture. Smell as well. If I tell you smell, all right? Olfactory, I need you to mention that olfactory nerve. Then we move on here, right? This one will tell you the process of it. Smell hits, where does it go up? Bipolar cells, right in here, action potentials are sent up to olfactory bulb. The major cells, right here, associated with that. Can you explain that to me? Mitral glomerulus cells. They're the major cells associated with smell. What is this map? I talked about this. Olfactory bulb mitral cells, very important. And then what does it end up projecting to? Olfactory receptors. It passes the limbic system. The olfactory bulb will project or send action potentials for the cell's hypothalamus, amygdala, frontal cortex, hippocampus. So each one, you're going to tell me, just think of it as every time you eat, what happens, right? Fungiform papillae for taste. This one's very important. It's a little bit more in detail. Remember taste buds, right? You're going to tell me taste falls in, those little chemical signatures come right in here. Taste buds are located right in between your papillae and these little valleys. Taste receptor, gustatory, epithelial cells themselves. These are the ones that are actually, remember, don't forget to mention either serotonin or ATP as a neurotransmitter. And then you're going to tell me these 5 basic tastes, how are they processed? This slide tells you how they're processed. What happens here? Then, after that, it's processed, right? TRPM5, remember these? Cranial nerves, they leave from your cranial nerves. They hit, right, the fascial, glossopharyngeal, vagus nerve, solitary nucleus in the medulla oblongata. Then we go up to the thalamus. Then finally, the gustatory cortex. That's how you tell me taste. Sound, another one. Hertz. Make sure you tell me that if I tell you to go ahead and describe that. How is it processed? We hear sound in hertz, that's how you define it. This is what I talked about. What is that? Hertz is measured in amplitude and wavelength. 3 major parts. I go into this, vestibular cochlear nerve. Right? How does sound go in here? Right? What is the purpose of this? Your ear is funneled. What is the first part it hits? How do all of these work together to transfer sound? Major parts right in here. Cochlea. This is where sound is processed. Where specifically? These are the 3 major chambers. The cochlear duct, spiral organ itself right in here. This little membrane, remember it's surrounded by this bony labyrinth. This is skeletal tissue. Tectorial membrane, make sure to mention the tectorial membrane. That's really what's pressing down on these hair cells. You're going to let me know how is it that, right here, how it goes up. The scala vestibuli comes down, right? Round window, remember displacement, right? This right here, tectorial membrane, touches down on your hair cells. These send off action potentials, vestibular cochlear nerve. Scala media. You have endolymph in here, paralymph out here. It's pretty much just liquid. You don't have to tell me endolymph or paralymph. It's filled with liquid. The spiral little organ right in here, okay, that pushes down. This is how, just showing you how it presses down every time sound is going into your ears. It leaves the vestibulocochlear nerve. Each sound is specific. This tells you right here, each sound has a specific hertz, and it will leave in a specific section of your cochlea. That's why your cochlea is set up in this manner. In different hertz will leave at different sections. That's how your brain is able to organize sound. As you can see in the bass, the frequency, high frequency, medium frequency, and low at the very top. So that's why, again, as I talked about in class, high frequencies, you hear them very quickly at the very beginning. If it's a low, it takes a bit for the sound to travel, and finally, the tectorial membrane will press down those hair cells. That section is designated for 200 hertz, so you'll be able to detect those really small little sounds. Okay, so it leaves vestibulocochlear nerve, cochlear nucleus in the brainstem, then inferior colliculus, then thalamus, then the auditory cortex. Don't skip all this and go to the auditory cortex. Remember, goes through there, leaves depending on the hertz, leaves out of the vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 8, cochlear nucleus, then up to the inferior colliculus, brainstem, then the thalamus. You don't have to tell me medial geniculate nucleus. Thalamus is fine. Then the auditory cortex. And there's different sections in it. It doesn't matter. Just let me know the auditory cortex. You don't have to tell me the temporal lobe. That's fine. Auditory cortex will do. Then we go into equilibrium. What is, remember, sound? If you tell me sound, don't forget equilibrium. What are semicircular canals? How do they, what's going on with this? Right, the liquid, the ampulla, the cupula, the cupola, right? These little hair cells, depending on how they bend, is how I'm able to detect, right, where my head is spinning. Then the other major parts, macula, utricle, saccule. What is this? How I measure head tilted forward. Sacs house equilibrium receptors. Your equilibrium macula that responds to gravity and changes in position of head. So the major thing here, it detects gravity, right? And this picture shows you what's happening right here as I tilt forward. So again, sound, make sure you tell me equilibrium as well. This will be worth 10 points. If you only tell me one or the other, that's half off. You only tell me half. So make sure and explain both of them, what's going on. So depending, make sure you know all 5. I will give you one long answer. I'll give you one long answer. It's going to be one of these 5, one of the 5 special senses. You have to describe from beginning to end. How is it processed? What are the major parts that I'm going through? If it's sound, if it's vision, if it's taste, or smell. So that'll be the rest, and then I will also have multiple choice questions for the other stuff as well. So if you can know all the functions of each one, you'll be good either if I give you a long answer or if I give you a multiple choice question. So now last we will do endocrine system. So for endocrine system, every single gland, endocrine gland, make sure you know what hormone does it produce from the very top. What is the endocrine system? This is important. These are the 3 different types of hormones that I can interact with. Polypeptide or peptide, amino acid, or a steroid. How do they interact with your cell? Polypeptide, amino acid, receptor on the outside. Steroids go straight through the phospholipid, interacts with the receptors, or directly with the DNA inside your nucleus. Actions of hormones, targets, general function of endocrine system, reproduction, growth and development, metabolism. What's an endocrine gland? What's an exocrine gland? I've already had you memorize this. This should be pretty easy. Know the differences. There There is one exception to the rule here. Remember, the pancreas has both endocrine and exocrine glands. So that, please know that. The pancreas is an exception to the rule. So starting from the very top, I need you to know, right? Opening and closing of ion channels, stimulate synthesis of enzymes and other proteins, activate or deactivate enzymes, induce secretion activity, stimulate mitosis. Other organs that produce hormones. These are important as well. You don't need to know what they produce, but just know that they also produce hormones of their own. So this is where I start talking about the very, very top, hypothalamus. There's a lot of key features of the hypothalamus I need you to know. Okay? I start talking about this. What are neurosecretory cells? What are they? They're specialized cells. They're technically the pituitary gland. Even though this is called, the whole thing is the pituitary gland, split into the posterior and anterior. I want you to know the major things here in the hypothalamus. See how it extends, and I talk about that. I talk about it in class and in the lectures in Blackboard. This is very important. Talk about this. These. So going down the line, every single one of these. I don't want you to know these right here, what hypothalamus releases. Just know that the hypothalamus either has a direct release, what are the two that it does, and then what are the other two that we have here. Each single one that we see right here, luteinizing, melanocyte stimulating, I want you to know each single hormone that we have here. Very important for your tests. So going down the line, then you will go down the line of each single one, right? For instance, the pineal gland, what does it do? We already talked about in the very, very beginning, secretes melatonin. So you'll tell me, what is the general function of that endocrine gland? What does it secrete? And that specific hormone, what does it do to you? In this case, the pineal gland secretes melatonin, and it's associated with the sleep and wake cycles. So you'll go through that all the way down. All the way till we end up in the last part, which is gonads, either male or female, major hormones associated with that. So that will be your endocrine system. So this test will comprise 3 chapters: autonomic nervous system, special senses, endocrine system. For your long answer, you'll have one. Just to reiterate, I will pick one of your special senses. Make sure you describe it to me in detail. You will have maximum, you will have 70 questions. Minimum, you will have 60. Multiple choice, we're still going to have some of those, what does not belong, what does belong, and so forth. Okay? So that wraps up your study guide. If you have any questions, you can find me in class, or you can go ahead and send me an email. Have a good day.